Hi, people. So I intend this one as another personal video. Just got distracted there. I got a lot of birds in the street, and sometimes I kind of have a little look to see if it's something unusual. Came across a woodpecker a while back, which was very unusual. So apologies if I'm distracted, but I'll focus. This is important. This is partly personal anecdote and partly constructive advice, hopefully, for anyone who didn't ask for it. But seriously, I think it's important for people to know this. And it's something that I'm still frankly, I'm still processing. So I intend this video to kind of serve as hopefully useful to anyone who's thinking of joining the armed forces in the UK. Now, a few disclaimers I want to make, and I want to be very clear about this. In no way should this video be seen as trying to put people off the armed forces. Absolutely not. It's not my intention. Um, it goes without saying it's not intended as disrespectful either, because I wouldn't have tried to join something I didn't respect. So that's the second point. And the third point, um, if anyone from the Royal Navy or Capita is watching this, I intend this solely as constructive criticism. Okay, I'm not trying to smear anyone. I'm not trying to cause trouble or anything like that. And it certainly isn't. It certainly isn't coming from a point of kind of resentment. It's more a point of this is what people need to know because it's something I feel I didn't really. Um, I won't say I didn't know, but I feel the pendulum, if I could put it this way, wasn't quite balanced in terms of what I could have known. It's probably a better way to describe that. But anyway, I'll cut to the chase. So earlier this year, actually December, I was looking for a job and I kept seeing these advertisements for the Royal Navy Reserves. I'm not going to put any secretive information in this video, obviously, or at least any, I'm not going to disclose anything I learned inside or anything like that because it's not the purpose of the video. What I do want to do is help people to prepare or know know what they might be up against. So I was interested in this. I've always been interested in the sea. I was born in Belfast. I've grown up in Sunderland. So the sea has always had an appeal for me. Basically, my motivations for joining the reserves, as opposed to the regular navy, was that twofold. Firstly, I wanted to try it out. I wanted to serve my country in some capacity. And there was that connection with the sea and camaraderie, social life. All those things came into it. Um, Why not the Army or the Air Force? Well, the Air Force, the nearest base from me, is probably in North Yorkshire, Catterick. It's just too far away, so that isn't really practical. And the Army just doesn't appeal to me in the same way. Like I said, there's a maritime appeal I was always interested in. I come from a military family. My brother's a soldier. I won't say what rank or anything like that, but let's just say he's an experienced soldier. And my father was in the army as well. Um, and I had relatives who died in both world wars, as a lot of people do. But I do consider that I come from a military family. Um, and my motivation for joining wasn't that. There was no pressure. It was entirely my own sort of choice. But it was kind of on my mind that it would be a nice continuity. Um, so anyway, what I would say from the outset to anyone thinking of joining, I'll be specific here to the Navy Reserves, but I do think the same would apply to any branch of the armed forces. But I'll stick to what I know, which is the Navy Reserves. So it's quite a long process. Be aware of that first of all. It's not like you apply and you go to an interview and you either get it or you don't. It's a long, drawn out process. And this is very important to know because even as a reservist job where you will have a main civilian job, you still invest a lot of time into it in terms of thinking about it, in terms of what you do. I have to say, my experience with the Navy side of things, Navy personnel, they were very professional. They always answered questions. I can't say that they left me in the dark in terms of any questions I asked. I would send my contacts an email. They would get back to me immediately. Um, by the way, before I continue, if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. As far as I know, I might not know everything, but I will know this side of it. Anyway, you go you fill in the initial paperwork, which is quite straightforward. It's just your name and contact details, your address, and so on. Then you go. I'm not going to get this absolutely spot on because I'm doing this video spontaneously. But then you go to the next phase, which is kind of phone interview, and that will be a representative of your local armed forces recruiting office. And usually they're a middle-ranking officer who just interviewed you and just asks why you're interested in it. There's a lot there about your personality, your background. They want to know all that stuff for obvious reasons. They want to know what sort of people they're letting in. Um, by the way, I had no problems whatsoever with demographics. There has been reports in recent years that in some branches of public life, let's put it that way, it's kind of this drive for diversity, and with that, this discrimination against white straight guys. Well, I didn't find that in the Navy. They really were blind to that. They were just looking at my background. So just that's just something for the record. Um, Relatively early on, surprisingly early on, I made my attestation. The United Kingdom basically means your oath of allegiance to the Queen and to her heirs. After all, it's the Royal Navy, and the Queen is head of state. So the way our armed forces is modelled, um, we serve Queen Elizabeth II as opposed to the government. Now, the reality is, if you go into a war zone or you're, acting out of government policy, that is government policy. But ultimately, it is in the Queen's name. Um, that's why you make the oath of allegiance to the Queen and not to the government. And that basically involves, in normal circumstances, you would go into the office and there would be a portrait of her and you would do it there. But because of the pandemic, so much of this training side of things was online. So basically, I was sitting down where I was. I did dress up because it's something I took seriously. I put on a suit and tie. I know that sounds daft because I'm in the living room, but I want to take it seriously. And basically, it's about a paragraph. I swear I will serve Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, with loyalty. I forget the verbatim, but it's along those lines. And that's your attestation. Now, you would think that's kind of set in stone. Okay, you're now in the armed forces. Not exactly. I'm not quite sure. I still don't quite know why they do that so early on. I suppose it's because if you're training in a military facility, then technically you're in a military capacity, and you're seeing things that civilians don't see. Um, Now, the next phase is what I really want to caution people about. It's the medical side of things. And this is something that the Navy themselves do warn about in terms of it being prolonged. I had a warrant officer, and his job was to kind of take new recruits like myself. That's what you're classed as. In the case of the Navy, it's able rate. I think it's able rate 2, and you're a new recruit. So your title is recruit. In my case, recruit Hazley. Um, and we start training basically, but it was all via Zoom meetings because of the pandemic. Now, I found that very informative, very useful, very helpful. The way it would work is the warrant officer would put us into breakout rooms, and I'm not giving away any state secrets here. It's just the protocol. And the petty officer, in my case, would kind of take me and a group of other people, and uh, he'd go through various things. It would be like a history of the Navy, particular protocol, uniform codes, all the things you need to know. anything you can imagine, they bring you through that. I found it very informative. I found it interesting. I quite enjoyed it. Obviously, at a point, the Zoom side of things got a bit strenuous, as has been discussed in the media. Actually, the very first lesson, so to speak, was about diversity and inclusion. So if you're a minority person, if you're LGBT, anything like that, don't be put off. The Navy is definitely forward thinking in that regard, in my experience. In my experience, because they took this particular session very seriously. You know, they went through diversity, and I don't recall off the top of my head the formal title for it, but they take that seriously. And in the group that I was in, there was, let's say, 25 people, 20 people. There was guys, there was women. Um, in this particular group, because it's Northeast England, it was mostly white, but there was an Asian guy. It was diverse. It was diverse. There was a lesbian woman, actually, as I recall. The point I'm driving home is any perception that people might have that it's this macho environment, you can dispel that. That's not the case. It's tough, but it's not macho, in my experience, is really not. I'm not saying that you won't get segments of the armed forces where there is still that culture. It would be naive to say that didn't exist. Certainly, and the Navy is no different. I imagine, for example, in certain certain occasions you might get that atmosphere where there's drink going around and so on. But honestly, they do consciously make an effort to be inclusive. But nevertheless, it's well, I was going to say it's taken on meritocracy, but what I'm going to say later in the video might contradict that, and bear with me because there's a few points that are very important here. So if you're thinking of joining the armed forces, please watch the whole video. This is all important. Right, so the medical phase, it starts off with a phone triage again because of the pandemic. And it's basically a nurse phones up and asks medical questions. This is after you fill in a medical form, which is kind of a self-assessment. There's a lot of questions there about allergies, about history of hospital appointments, and so on. Now, this is something that I want to kind of caution people about. At that point, at that point, and this is perhaps, every recruit moves at a different pace, and sometimes the precise order of things isn't quite the same. Um, at that point, you need to be aware that your answers might, they might have a big impact on the decision further down the line. I should say, by the way, I forgot the education side of things. In theory, someone shouldn't need tertiary education to be in the armed forces, and they don't. That's not a requirement. But they were surprisingly meticulous about. I felt a bit strange because I'm an educated guy. I didn't graduate university, but I feel I'm educated. I have experience for example, I took a teaching course which I qualified in. I did go to university. I didn't graduate, but what was surprising was they were quite meticulous about like GCSE results, and in my case, that's going back a long way. By the way, regarding age, I'll just quickly make this point. I'm 35. In the case of the reserves, that's not such an issue. I think the upper limit is 42, 40 or 42. So if you're in your late 30s, mid 30s, don't be put off. You can still join. But if in doubt, ask the recruiting officer. In fact, ask him almost anything or her because they will be your main point of contact. You might go for a couple, but you will have one who's kind of the main point of contact. Anyway, once you do that education side of thing and self medical form, what you have to do is send it to Birmingham and to a company called Capita. Now, this is kind of the elephant in the room of this video, Capita. Um, I know for a fact that I am not the only one who has had issues with this company, and I would say to anyone thinking of joining the armed forces, be aware Capita has a lot of influence. So basically, you do this phone triage, which is basically questions, and I think they read from the information that you've filled in. Then, in theory, they're supposed to send it to your local GP. Now, in my case, I had to kind of follow them up. I had to kind of say to Kappa, well, this hasn't been sent, and I had to get the email myself and kind of copy and paste it, and then send it to my GP. What happens then is your GP has to kind of make a formal response. Now, you can imagine a GP, particularly during the pandemic, is going to have bigger priorities than consultation work. Basically, what that is. Um, so there is an onus on the recruit to follow up and to put pressure on their GP to kind of do this. And that's difficult because, on one hand, you want to be polite, you don't want to be rude and say, do this, because ultimately they don't have to. I think the way it works is Capita pays them. But the problem is there is administrative problems, as I understand it, between Capita and the civilian GP side of things. Now, Capita is a contracting firm. They do an enormous amount of outreach work to all sorts of companies, but the Armed Forces is one of them. And basically, the Armed Forces is in a contract with this company, Capita, to do medical assessments. Now, because it's a contract, apparently they can't just easily move out of it. But I know for a fact that there is definitely some contentions with the way Kappa works, and in my experience, it is definitely a problem. So basically, I kept following up and following up. Eventually, my GP or the secretary rather in my GP surgery phones and says, Nathan, the form's been sent away, and I had to keep following them up because the doctor was on holiday and there was just various things going on. Now, at the time, that was a huge relief. I felt wonderful. That's it. Finally passed this phase. Well, I didn't hear anything from Capita for a week, for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I'm still taking these Zoom sessions every Wednesday evening. That's what it was online. And I even got to the point with the easing of the lockdown restrictions where I went into the local unit. Now, I'm not going to give details of that for obvious reasons, um, in terms of just location and stuff, because it's, I don't know if there's any legalities on that, but basically, within that context, yeah, we went through a bit more training, and I found that day very interesting. And I particularly like the fact that I met my would-be colleagues. I even got a nice blue folder with information in it about just self-assessments on nice leather blue folder. Well, probably PVC, but nevertheless, it looked nice. I'd also subscribed to Navy newspapers, like a monthly news publication. Right, so this is basically half a year we're talking about. It was about May that it's ended, so December, May, it's about half a year. Around a month ago, I get a call from Capita, or rather an email from Capita. They don't call you, basically saying I am now permanently unfit for service. Permanently. In fact, there was a process before that where I was classified as temporarily unfit, and that's normal. I should stress that is normal while they assess your situation. I was told that this is something that most recruits go through, probably 70% of recruits, probably because most people at some point in their life have had a broken arm or they've been in hospital at least once. So pretty much everyone has that temporarily unfit situation. Now, why was I registered as permanently unfit? This is what you need to know. In 2016, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I was in 2012 as well. I have to be honest here; it happened twice. And basically that is the reason that Kappa cited. Now, I'd been in the hospital in 2020 with a bout of shingles, which is basically an irritating rash that you get at the side. There's no particular reason for it. If you had chickenpox as a child, then you can get it as an adult. It's very irritating, but it wasn't even an overnight stay. I got treatment, it was solved, the problem was gone in a couple of days. No issue. I thought if there was any stall, it might have been that. I didn't think that my depression would be held as the reason. So the first thing I done, obviously I was gutted, but the first thing I done was contact my careers officer, and basically what he told me was I could make an appeal, but in his opinion, what would happen is it would just be the same information. They would take the same information and it would be the same result. because the information they had would come from my GP. Now, I asked a few people close to me their thoughts on this. My parents, for example, and they made the point that it was 5 years ago. So if I had an updated medical status, it might make a difference. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't fully pursue that. You might say, why, Nathan? Well, why didn't you follow that up? The truth of the matter is, the very strong impression I got from the Navy and from Capita was that this was basically that's it. It's a decision that's set in stone. I think they were saying I could make an appeal as a sort of, I guess, legal disclaimer. No, maybe I should have went for that. But the entire onus is on the recruit, and you basically get very minimal support if you're in my position. Now, this differentiates from other situations whereby you might have, let's say, been in the hospital with a broken bone, but the bone fixed. Um, I think in that case, the Navy would be more supportive. Now, I'm not criticizing them for this. I want to be clear about that. I'm just saying that it seems to me that if you've had a history of clinical depression, that is something that they set in stone. They just they think it's too big a liability, and I do understand where they're coming from because obviously, if people are in the armed forces, are handling weapons potentially, potentially even in the combat zone, because reservists can be joined to the regulars. You don't want someone who's mentally unstable, as they see it. Now, to me, whatever sentiments I had at that time, I don't have now. And I know this to be true because my response to the disappointment wasn't to react the way I would have done at that time. At that time, maybe I would have binge drink and I would have gotten into a deep depression. This time, I was disappointed and I'm still disappointed. And it's a big blow, but it's not the end of the world. So I know in myself that my mental health is more stable than it was then. But the bit that bugged me was that presumably a sizable proportion of the population have clinical depression or have had clinical depression at some point. I don't know what the statistics would be. I don't want to put a figure on that, but I would be very surprised if it isn't at least 1 in 10 people in the British public. I think clinical depression is pretty common. It's not like so really. It's not like something that is less common that they might be very wary of. It's something that is known. It's something that I have played the devil's advocate. I have looked at it from their perspective. I guess they would say, well, what if you had a particularly hard training session? What if things went wrong? Because this is the armed forces, it's not a game, and even though it's the reservists, they still treat it like the real thing. Well, because it is the real thing, it's just the time is this. So I guess from their point of view, if you had kind of a depressive episode, could you be a reliable team player, etc., etc., etc. So I've looked at all these reasons to look at their. They didn't go into details. I assume this is what they would say. So the truth is, I just didn't feel I had the moral support to follow up or the support from the Navy side. The way my advisor was speaking sounded cynical. And he wasn't being, I'm not suggesting he was being unprofessional or anything like that. I think he was just trying to basically let me know I could try, but it would probably be a waste of time. And I'm thinking, well, do I really want to devote more time only to be disappointed again? And then, even if I'd done that, because like I say, the onus is on the recruit. So what you have to do, I would have had to go to my GP directly, get him to physically sign something saying I'm fine, then get it to be sent off. And then hopefully Capita would change their mind. But basically, I feel like I'm up against something I can't fight. Now, a few people said to me, "Oh, isn't this discrimination?" It's disappointing from my point of view, and I do think it's unfortunate that they take such a sweeping attitude to depression. Like because someone was once depressed, that means they're potentially unstable for the rest of their life. I mean, the way they worded the response was these decisions are taken over a long period of time. Um, my big contention with Capita is they do string you along. You know, they do keep you waiting. I think unnecessarily. They had the information. I put it on my own. You know, I was honest because there was no point in lying. They would have found out from the GP anyway. I put it on my own medical assessment that I had clinical depression. So if that is such a decisive factor, I wish they just told me a month before, or it might have been 2 months before. I wouldn't have done the other training sessions. By the way, I was paid for that. No issue there. They pay on time. It's a month in arrears. The pay isn't wonderful, but they do pay. Um, but you know, it's there was a lot of things I went through. I access MOD information that civilians can't access. Still have access to it. So I don't know what that's about. Um, but basically, I want this video to serve as a caution to anyone who's thinking of joining the armed forces. If at any point in your life you've had clinical depression, just be aware that there is a strong chance, from my experience, that that will be a ruling factor. So basically, if you've had clinical depression, I would check with that very early on. Now, what my careers officer said was he was honest. He said, "I'm not a doctor. I can't decide something like that." But I think he did warn me that it would be possibly a deciding factor. So I really don't have contention with the Navy side. The officers I dealt with were professional. They always got back to me. I'm not complaining so much about the Navy, although I do think that they need to reassess their situation with Capita. And to be fair to my warrant officer, he did mention that. He did mention that it's a problem. Um, yeah, I'm not a whistleblower or anything like that. It's not. I don't see it as that serious, that in depth. All I'm saying is that if you're planning to join the armed forces, I'm not trying to put you off. Go for it. It's a worthy thing. And the Navy, it's it's a deeply important part of our culture, of our national tradition. And I'm gutted. I'm really, really. I think it will be some time before I get over this because you can't devote yourself to something for 6 months, 5.5 months, only for it to just fall flat in your face and not have some, very disappointing feelings about that. Because I know every time, I see the Navy in the news, I'm going to be thinking I could have been in that. You know, I didn't get to know my colleagues very well, but they seemed like a good bunch of people, and I was looking forward to developing a social life, and just there's a lot of things that go out the window. And to be honest, for a long time, I've been reluctant even to make this video because I thought, well, if I'm in an appeals process or if I'm still getting trained or anything like that, it would be inappropriate to make this video. But I think at this point, it is appropriate and it is justified as a caution to others. And for anyone in the Navy, I'm not being resentful. I'm not trying to turn people against it. I'm just giving them fair warning. By all means, if you haven't had a history of depression and you're physically fit, go for it. Go for it. It's a good profession. But I don't like the way Capita strings people along, and there is a bit of there's a clinical side to it. By the way, I also had to go to an optician's, not my local optician's. I had to go to the Metro Centre, which is a bit out of my way, especially when lockdown was still at its peak. There was snow all over the place. No one else was out there. The Metro Centre, which is one of the biggest shopping malls in Europe, was like it was like something from a zombie film. The good thing about that was I got a full bill of health. Apparently, my test was slightly better than the last eye test that I got, if that's possible. Um, but I had to arrange that myself. They give you a code, and you have to sort that all out. So there is quite a lot of onus on the recruit, which is fine. It's responsibility. But what I do think should be challenged, and what I do think that Capita needs to change, is the way they keep people in the dark. I don't see any reason why someone should wait over a month to find out something that they've already decided. If it really is such a like, there's no way around this, then And that's pretty much the strong indication they gave me with the wording. The thing about the appeal, it struck me as kind of a formality rather than there's any realistic chance of anything happening. And maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should have went for that appeal immediately. But I just think I just didn't want to get more face more bureaucracy. And to be honest, I was quite frustrated at the time. I thought, well, why should I go out of my way again? I've done everything I've been asked to do. And what I would simply say as kind of feedback to the Navy, they did specifically say, as recruits, they want feedback. So this is my feedback. You're in contract with Kappa. I would just offer that Kappa strings people along, and they're getting the hopes up because I would have been had I still been a recruit. I would have been going to Cornwall next month for my passing out parade, which is the final stage where you're finally in the Navy. That's not happening. I mean, to be honest, I prefer that this rejection came now rather than if it had been at that time. But it's a huge blow. 31 minutes. I didn't intend this to be so long, but this is what you need to know. Right, final few words. I am not, this is not meant to be like, don't join the armed forces. That is not what I'm saying. I haven't given away any state secrets or anything, uh, that I'm aware of that betrays the MOD code of conduct or anything like that. Another thing about the appeal process, they always stress question the decision, not the standard, i.e., not the integrity of the decision, but just the judgment. Um, but I haven't went for it because the strong indication I got was like, there's no way. That's pretty much what my careers officer said. And I feel if I don't have his support, then is it really worth pursuing? Because he'd be the person I would have to, he doesn't make any decision on the medical side, but he is the recruitment officer. So that's all I would say. If you're thinking of joining the armed forces, be aware of this. But I don't think it's inappropriate to make this video. I think quite the opposite. I think people need to know. But in terms of the Navy itself, they were, they answered every question I had. They were very professional. They're informative. I've no criticism of that. I just think that the way Capita strings people along, the bureaucracy that you have to deal with, it's quite frustrating. And this constant going back and forth between your GP and Capita, it's frustrating, but that is the onus on the recruit. So just be aware of that. It might be that when lockdown fully ends, that side of it will be less bureaucratic. I don't know. But just be aware this is what you will face. Thanks for watching.